Welcome to the Wildly More podcast. My name is Joe Vacani, and I'm with my wife, Kate. Today, we're going to be talking about some tragedy, but how God really came through in the midst of it.
In James 1, verse 27, it says, "Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world." You know, when we started Let Them LOL, now Hope Rising, it was really our heart just to meet widows, orphans, people in their time of need, mostly with clean water because it was such a practical thing. And I remember when we started it, we just really felt like that wasn't a blatantly Christian act. Of course it is, because that is the heart of Christ. But it was something that anybody could get involved in. And we just wanted to get as many people as possible together to help bring people clean water. And then over time, as the program grew and we started to have more boots on the ground and more connectivity and relationship building, we, of course, every chance we got, shared what our motivation was. You know, we'd show up in these villages in the middle of nowhere and people would say, "Why would you guys come here?" And we said, "It's because of the love of Christ that we've come to this place." And so now, 15 years later, as we've shared some of it and we'll continue to share more of it, God has really done so much more than we could ask or imagine. And over the last couple of years, we really felt like the ability to share the gospel even more became so much more important, because we know you can give people a cup of clean water today, but they really need the living water. Water is a big issue for them, but having hope for eternity for all of their lives is what is really going to sustain them through the highs and lows that we all go through in life. And so as we started going back, I remember a couple of years back, we were there on a Sunday and the staff and the kids said, "Do you want to come to church?" And I said, "Sure." I didn't know that we had a church. And so if you could imagine the scene, kids that had been orphans, women that were widows, some of our guy staff, girls that were in our girls' dormitory safe house that had been rescued from really horrific situations and futures, all of a sudden put together this whole worship service. Can you imagine seeing girls that were rescued up leading worship and our young boys playing their local drums and our home mothers preaching the gospel? And it was this incredible experience to see how they had taken the heart of Christ and made it their own. And so they started to meet in our pavilion, which is at our school, which is great for most of the year. A lot of times goats would wander in, and then sometimes when it rains, you know, rain will sometimes come in sideways. And so they were dealing with the elements, but still week after week worshiping Jesus, even through some really hard times and big losses. And then when I was recently there this past September and October, I just felt that something had really shifted in the people there. The love of Christ had really transformed them, and they really wanted to reach their communities and villages with the gospel. And so it was then that we really felt that it was the right time to actually build them a physical church. We know what it's like. We've planted a church here in downtown Buffalo. We'll share more about that in the future. And every week the setup and tear down and all that goes into that. And they were doing a similar thing. And so it was really our heart to help see them build a church. And on that trip in September, we really felt like it was time to begin to pray and ask the Lord to provide for that. And so on the flight, on the way back, I got out my notebook, as I have so many times before when God put something on our heart, and I'm not an architect or an artist, but started to sketch out what a church could possibly look like, what a building there could look like. And we all know that there's nothing, magical about a building. The church is God's people, but to have a place of refuge, a place where God's presence is, where people can gather together, it really felt like, in a way, like the crown on top of this beautiful thing that God has built. And it felt in a way like a pipe dream, even though we've seen him do so much. Like, how could we possibly build an actual church building? And as I was doing the drawing, I looked out, and we'll post this photo. as part of this, but I looked out the window and I kid you not, I saw the shape of a cross in the sky and I saw this rainbow. And I just remembered that all of God's promises are yes and amen. And he has been the one that has been in everything that has happened. And he's the one who wants to build his church, not only here in Buffalo and across the U.S., but all around the world. And I really believe that he is answering the prayers of his people that have been crying out in this really dark and hard place that we work to build a physical church. And so as life goes and things happen, 3 short weeks later, I was so excited to be able to start fundraising for it and getting people involved in this. And 3 weeks later, Joe and I experienced a life-altering tragedy, and it really impacted our family. It really felt like a setback, and we're still dealing with the physical ramifications of what that all meant. And so because of that, a lot of my time that would normally be spent fundraising and telling the story of this church was really occupied with other things that I had to take care of. And it was really, really very sad. But we slowly still started to raise enough money to at least get started. So I reached out to the contractor there. I said, we have this much money. Is there anything we can do? And he said, actually, that's perfect, because what we can do with that money is we can start to cast the blocks. So they take sand from the river that's right by us, as only God could work out that we have a river where we can get the sand, which is one of the big expenses for building there. He said, we could start to cast the blocks. And he said, in fact, Kate, it's actually better for us to let the blocks sit. The longer that the blocks for the foundation sit in the elements, the longer that they sit in the sun, and the longer that they're rained on, and they can become hardened and build a stronger foundation. And I just was so impacted by that. You know, so many times in our lives, we feel like, you know, God, we're following what you asked us to do, and yet we have these delays or we have these setbacks, but he's using it to form it, to shape it, to make it stronger, to be able to last for all of the things that are to come in the future. And I'm reminded of when Jesus talked about a house built on a rock or a house built on sand. And so these blocks, as they sat there, the longer that they sat while we waited for the rest of the funds to come in, was just building a stronger foundation, not only for the physical church, but for the actual church, and building up strength and endurance for the people there and for us here. And I had asked some representatives from the church there if they would go the first day the contractors and the workers were casting the blocks, if they would go and pray and sing some worship songs over those blocks. And it turned out that one of the main people who prayed over those blocks was our social worker named Mary. Mary is one of those people that just lights up a room. Mary's one of those people that reminds you of Jesus. When we started Let Them LOL, Now Hope Rising, our heart was, and our mission statement was, to empower those experiencing unjust suffering. We didn't feel like we needed to be the ones to physically be there. We knew that God had called and raised up wonderful people to love the kids and to do the work there. And over the years, we've prayed for people to have it be more than a job, but to really be their heart. And Mary, she's one of those people where, you know, you can't fake things. When I go over there and I see the kids surrounding her and the way that they love her and she loves them. Well, tragically, just about a week and a half ago, Mary was in a tragic car accident and she died. And for a moment, it felt like the heart of the program died. And as I was in a time of prayer here in Buffalo, I was reminded back in December when they were casting the concrete blocks, and I was reminded that Mary was one of the main people who prayed over those blocks. And she prayed this beautiful prayer, and we'll post that later. But I tell you that story to say that was unexpected, that was unplanned. Mary was one of the people we had in mind to help lead this church, and now here we've got these concrete blocks, and Mary's taken from us. But God, as we know, works all things for his good. And we know Mary's heart was to see the gospel be spread in her country. We really believe her life and her prayer that she prayed in that moment was a seed. And so fast forward to last night, because of Mary's story and because of how God works, the church is now completely funded. A donor gave the money to fund the church. And one thing I forgot to share is a couple weeks ago, I had a dream. And in my dream, I was in the newly built church in Sierra Leone. And I was up at the altar, and it was so beautiful. And I was by myself. I had asked for a moment to be by myself there. And I was doing what I do a lot of times when I travel to Sierra Leone. I will just take a moment alone with God and walk around and just be amazed by the miracles of what he's done. And I would encourage you, in whatever your journey is, whatever God has you doing, I would encourage you to pause. Sometimes, we get so war-torn, we get so exhausted from the battles that we're fighting that when God does something, it's like, oh, thank you. But then we kind of just move on because there's still more to do. But pause, listen to worship music, reflect, thank him for what he's done. It's like little monuments that you're building. That's what he commanded the Israelites to do, so that when they were going on and fighting more battles, they could look back, they could tell their children. And so in my dream, I'm in this beautiful church, and I'm by myself at the altar, and I'm praying, and I'm just thanking God that he has done more than we could ask or imagine to be in such a beautiful place, and knowing how he was going to use it for his purpose. And all of a sudden, I hear the doors open in my dream, and I turn around, and there's all of these people from the villages, and they're saying, Kate, please, we need to build the Church of Jesus here in Sierra Leone. And in my dream, I'm like, guys, like, we just built this one. Like, you're already asking for another? They said, no, you don't understand. Our hearts are crying out. We're crying out. We need the hope of the gospel in our villages. And I woke up from that dream, and I honestly got into a fight with the Lord. I just cried, and I said, Lord, you know our situation. You know what just happened to us. You know the setback that our family has had. You know that we had to cancel our annual fundraiser because of what happened to us, because of all the appointments we have to go to and all that we're dealing with. Why are you sending me this dream of these people praying for a church when I can't accomplish it on my own? We can't accomplish it. We can barely make it through a day right now because of what you've allowed to happen. And I just felt so heartbroken and so overwhelmed. Well, 2 hours later, an old friend reached out to me, and he said, hey, Kate, is it true? Are you guys building a church in Sierra Leone? And I did one of those looking up to heaven, and I go, there'll be no living with you after this, Lord. Because how out of nowhere was this guy reaching out to me? Well, it's because the Lord is the one who's working. And he was at work, and he had spoken to this person. And I explained to him the situation and what was happening. And God used that conversation to now fast forward to last night. And now we have been given the funds to build the church and to see how the Lord wants to use that and what he wants to do. So I just want to encourage you with that story through Mary's life. She's now in heaven praising the Lord, and she will see the church get built. And through what we went through, that all that we did was we just didn't give up, even though that meant that we couldn't tangibly make it happen. We couldn't put ourselves out there and do this fundraiser, and I couldn't post online about the church, but it's God's church. It's his work. So whatever he has called you to, if it's his work, he will accomplish it. And we really just have to yield our lives to whatever he allows to happen, trusting that he is working it all together. The Bible says that we are the church that he is building, each one formed and fashioned together, built on the prophets and the apostles, and of course, Christ as a cornerstone. So when we give our lives, even through the hard things, and let him shape us and use us, it's him who's building his church.
I want to thank everyone. Kate and I would like to, on behalf of our charity, for all who have given towards the church project. It is always so encouraging to see all the places and the people that God has done. One of the things that we hope and desire you hear today is you might have a lot of dreams you're pursuing right now, And one of the things that we've hoped this podcast would help with is for you to develop resilience and inner resilience. Jesus said, I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly. And there's two ways you can view abundant life. Many people will view it externally. And I want to just remind you today that if you place your hope and your meaning in things that are external, you will constantly be disappointed. Good people die in car accidents. Good people have injuries. Good people have health issues. If you're to place your meaning and your worth in things like the economy, weather, today it's supposed to be spring and it's literally snowing out again. So we know the first thing about putting your hope in weather, but things like politics, financial resources, your health, all those things externally will come and go. When Jesus talks about the abundant life, we're convinced that is something that takes place internally, that Jesus comes and meets us where we're at when he comes into our lives, in the places where our souls, our minds, and our hearts intersect with God. And it's in those places where Jesus brings us joy, he brings us contentment, he brings us peace, he brings us meaning. And we have to do the hard work of meeting him there. And that's where you take his word, you take his promises, and you do the hard work of meeting Jesus in your mind and in your heart and in your soul. I like to say that we like to put a Jesus Band-Aid on everything, where we have a wound, a gushing wound, and we put a Band-Aid on it that says Jesus. And we say, well, I put my Jesus Band-Aid on, it's all good. But the truth is, underneath that wound, there's infections that could be taking place, things that would internally make you sick and ultimately die. And so we like to view Jesus more as an antibiotic. And with my pharmacy background, we would explain to people how antibiotics work, and you would take a pill, and antibiotics basically attack bacteria by literally affecting cellular replication. So there's so many different antibiotics out there, and the reason is they all attack cell replication in different spots. Some attack the bacteria and the DNA aspect of the origins. Some of it breaks the cell wall down. And the antibiotic itself doesn't actually kill the infection. Your own immune system then ultimately comes as these cells can't replicate and the bacteria can't grow in your body and the infection can't grow. Your own immune system has to come and actually destroy and kill the bacteria living inside of you. And so this hard work, it's Jesus coming into your life and using his word, but then you also have to work with him and do the hard work to develop the resilience that you're going to need to accomplish every dream that God puts on your heart, because there will be a lot of tragedy, a lot of hard stuff, and a lot of obstacles. And we would encourage you to do that. And this week, Mary's life reminded us of this saying that I've heard many times before and seen in many different places. And it's a saying that says, you don't get to choose when you die, and you don't get to choose how you die, but you do get to choose how you're going to live. And so we would encourage you to be people who choose to live your life in such a way that takes Jesus' promises, Jesus' word, you internalize it into your life and use it to help develop the resilience you're going to need to accomplish all your hopes and dreams. And that would be our heart for you today. So we want to thank you for listening to the Wildly More podcast. Our hope is that you would develop more resilience, more courage, more meaning, and more dreams. Please, if you can, if you're listening on YouTube, subscribe to this channel. It'll help get the word out and pass us on. We can't thank you enough for all you've done. And may you live your life this week wildly more.